don't have dessert in front of you, quick, go ahead and grab some dessert. I will still keep my introduction of our keynote speaker rather short. He will be here to speak from his experience as the President and CEO of Ontario Centres of Excellence, and you'll see that his credentials are quite impressive. Some time spent at Waterloo, where much commercial activity is taking place and where we hope there will continue to be great successes for Canadian IT sector. And has some expertise also from that sector as having been in the private sector. He lends some of his expertise to Alberta Innovates, and it's all of that acquired wisdom through all of those experiences that bring him to this talk today for this audience. Dr. Tom Corr, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I was going to have some lunch, but I thought if I got some salad stuck in my tooth, I'm going to be getting a strange look for all of you for the next half an hour or so. So I avoided lunch, which I can very easily stand to do. So, good afternoon, everyone. I was honored to be invited to address you today. I say this knowing what an important time this is for Genome Canada and for the field of genomics in general. The advances in health sciences that have come with the 2003 completion of the Human Genome Project in this country and beyond have been nothing short of remarkable. But what has caught my attention recently are the headlines about breakthroughs in genomics related to other fields, ones as diverse as agriculture, forestry, fisheries, mining, energy, and clean technology. This is truly an exciting area of rapid growth and expansion that promises untold opportunities to shape the future of our world. I expect that the wealth of applications for genomics research that is now becoming apparent far exceeds what was imagined by the public and by industry. Before going any further, I'd like to give you a bit of a roadmap as to what I plan to talk to you about today. As you heard from the introduction, I've been immersed in the world of innovation and commercialization for most of my career. And Ontario Centres of Excellence, where I am now CEO, has been working to commercialize innovation originating in the province's publicly funded colleges, universities, and research hospitals for 26 years. I'm going to tell you about OCE and our approach to commercializing, or what you and your colleagues more commonly refer to as the translation of research. I will share some thoughts about the challenges OCE has faced and what we have learned along the way. And I'll sum up with my thoughts on why, in my view, there is a very strong future potential for commercialization or translation of genomics, and along with that, the opportunity for many of you involved in genomics research to have a significant and material impact on the quality of life of future generations. Before I get to OCE, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the impressive and sometimes challenging journey that Genome Canada has been on since its founding in 2000. This includes the establishing of the organization, along with its regional centers across the country, and developing a national strategy for advancing scientific discovery in genomics. Now you have come to a new plateau where there is, let's say, an elevated level of expectations for how well and for how quickly public research dollars are being translated into concrete products and technological advances. The weight being put on this imperative was driven home with the recent announcement of your new GAP program, through which the federal government is investing $30 million in Genome Canada, money that goes toward funding projects that address practical, everyday genomics challenges and increases collaboration between researchers and industry, and all towards the ultimate goal of creating jobs and driving economic growth. I don't know about you, but it does have the ring of a certain well-known parable. To whom much is given, much is expected. I hope that in sharing OCE's story today, I can offer some interesting parallels between our two organizations and perhaps even point a way forward based upon our own experience and lessons learned over the years. When OCE was founded 26 years ago, the economy of Ontario and Canada was undergoing a major transition. The traditional economic foundation was shifting from a North American-focused and commodities-based economy to one that is globally oriented and knowledge-based. This required a new way of thinking about what was needed to drive economic growth and prosperity. Before OCE was created, there was an invisible but entrenched line of demarcation between industry and universities, colleges, and research hospitals. Consensus emerged that these academic and research institutions were producing high-quality research, but that it was not being utilized to its full potential by industry, and that something had to be done to bridge that gap. OCE was established with a mandate of creating productive working partnerships between Ontario industry and university and college researchers. OCE is funded primarily by the Government of Ontario, and we are now a member of what is called the Ontario Network of Entrepreneurs. And with an unmistakable focus on our end game of creating economic benefit and jobs, we are a key partner in delivering Ontario's innovation agenda. So, bringing industry and academia together, what could possibly be easier? And that is only one aspect of the challenge OCE has faced. To move discoveries to market, we also needed to create the commercialization machinery and a supportive environment in which innovation and entrepreneurs could thrive. This has required us to take a two-pronged approach to getting this done. On the one hand, we are faced with a cultural challenge. Academia and industry exist in distinct realms, with their own ways of thinking and talking about the world, and their own reward systems. Something like business is from Mars and academia is from Venus. Not only that, but they have tended to be suspect of one another. I'm sure you're all familiar with the kind of unflattering stereotypes that get applied to academics and likewise to the corporate business world. Like most generalizations, these are unfair, but some are somewhat grounded in reality. Businesses are obligated to report to shareholders on a quarterly basis. They tend to be more focused on short-term objectives and quick results, while academics are motivated by the desire to publish and have a longer-term perspective. Most academic researchers want to be able to pursue their research without pressure to produce immediate results, while business tends to work towards short-term defined targets and goals. At the same time, the interests of those who work in business and in academia do intersect in many ways. Most people want to feel that they are productive and making a meaningful contribution to society. Most enjoy working collaboratively. Most understand that innovation often flows when different areas of expertise and different mindsets come together. A primary objective of OCE is to build a better understanding of what is required to get innovation into the hands of those who can put it to use. And equally importantly, to encourage a view that commercialization of research is an acceptable career path in academia, one that can be just as valuable and rewarding as a scientific breakthrough. It is well understood that this is not for everyone. We don't want or need everyone doing research in our institutions of higher learning to go down this road. But we do want to encourage them and support those who are inclined to go in this direction. In terms of building Canada's innovation capacity, OCE and Genome Canada can only do so much. We're only two players in Canada's highly complex and multifaceted innovation ecosystem. But we can have a significant impact by seeding a culture of innovation and through our own success stories, demonstrating how industry and academia are working together to create amazing new technologies, products, and services that are addressing some of the most important challenges facing our society today. As I mentioned earlier, the other half of the equation is building the framework of a supportive environment with the right players, programs, and services that enable the commercialization process. For example, it's one thing knowing that collaboration can be mutually beneficial, and quite another finding out how to make those relationships happen. At OCE, we have what we refer to as our secret sauce. This is our team of 30 business development managers located in 6 offices through the province. They are on the ground and seriously in the faces of industry and academia. They knock on industry doors to ask what's needed and also explore academic labs by asking researchers what's new. And then they work with companies and researchers to access OCE's tailored programs for commercializing innovation. We have come to see ourselves as a broker of connections, identifying and facilitating investment transactions in which OCE may have a minor, if any, direct financial stake, but can help companies on the road to commercialization. Let me tell you a little bit about some of our programs. Our C2C program, which stands for Collaborate to Commercialize, operates under a similar model to your new GAP program. It helps companies commercialize all types of innovations, technical, business, and social. It operates under an industry pull model to specifically meet industry's identified needs. We in the innovation space often speak of the push-pull dynamic. The push refers to discoveries or breakthroughs that are, in a sense, non-commissioned. That is to say, their momentum derives from intellectual curiosity. Whether tangible applications are on the immediate horizon is pretty much irrelevant. C2C facilitates the industry-academic cooperation necessary for solving tough industry challenges and exploring marketable solutions. Students gain real-world experience and connections with established companies. Researchers benefit through their involvement in exciting new research challenges and by establishing some valuable relationships with industry. These projects are provided with OCE funding, an amount of up to $250,000. Through our market readiness program, we work directly with startups. This is where we help researchers and companies commercialize a promising innovation developed in one of the academic institutions, either by creating a company or pursuing a licensing opportunity. This program helps navigate the path from research to the marketplace through activities such as assessment of technology, prototype design and development, proof of concept, clinical evaluation, product testing, and market strategy. I can't overstate the importance of this kind of support. We are equipping young entrepreneurs with the critical business skills that they need to ensure success. And we are also playing an extremely valuable role in de-risking a startup to the point where it becomes attractive to the investment community. Again, OCE investments can range from $10,000 to $250,000, and through the life of a startup, up to $600,000 can be obtained through OCE's various programs. OCE has just recently been handed responsibility for managing Ontario's new collaboration voucher program. Eligible Ontario companies can receive a voucher, which is a credit that they can redeem for expertise and resources from the province's academic institutions to advance productivity and commercialization. This adds an important new dimension to our program suite by allowing companies quick and easy access to the expertise and knowledge at our universities, colleges, and research hospitals. Ontario is alone in offering such a wide range of innovation vouchers. They include a voucher for commercialization to help academic-based companies launch new products, a voucher for innovation and productivity to help companies refine products and processes, a voucher for e-business to help business take advantage of online tools to drive growth, and a voucher for industry association R&D challenges to enhance competitiveness across whole industry sectors. OCE recently awarded its first voucher for industry association R&D challenges to the Ontario Aerospace Council. This $2.5 million program is supporting areas of technology that are strategically important to the Ontario Aerospace Council. OCE, along with industry and NSERC, will support 5 qualified projects, each lasting up to 2 years. Another relatively new OCE program is that of playing an important role in driving innovation in Ontario as it relates to high-performance computing. This involves an unprecedented partnership with IBM, 7 Ontario universities, the province of Ontario, and the Federal Economic Development Agency, or FedDev, it is known. OCE's role is to ensure that small to medium-sized companies gain access to the high-performance computing resources and the technical expertise that they need to succeed. We are working to educate businesses on how they can use big data to create value and become more competitive. You may be aware that IBM's Blue Gene computer, which is part of the OCE program, was recently proclaimed the fastest computer in Canada and was originally built to help biologists observe the processes of gene expression and protein folding. The benefits of being able to process massive amounts of data as quickly as possible will be obvious to genomics researchers. Two of the companies OCE has worked with in this area are Chemetria, a University of Toronto bioinformatics startup, and RNA Diagnostics, a molecular diagnostic technology that radically improves cancer chemotherapy management. Through a range of talent programs, we also devote considerable resources towards developing the next generation of entrepreneurs by helping Ontario's college and university students and recent graduates develop business skills. Our experiential learning program, for example, links post-secondary students and recent graduates to industry to foster the development of new innovations and startups. This has been highly successful and resulted in more than 361 startups graduating out of academic institutions in the last year alone. Now that I've given you a brief description of some of our main programs, I want to underline 4 overriding policies or approaches that inform how we work. The first relates to the high level of diligence that we undertake on behalf of the taxpayers of Ontario and Canada in allocating OCE funding. All applications for larger projects are internally and externally peer-reviewed. External reviewers are drawn from OCE's network of experts and come from academia, industry, and the financial community. They are selected on a case-by-case basis for their sector-specific knowledge and their knowledge of commercialization. Secondly, in assessing applications, we are looking for a strong evidence of how this project will promote economic development for Ontario through job creation, product sales, and global competitiveness. Only those bringing economic potential, as well as first-class, groundbreaking research to the table, will meet our criteria. Thirdly, all of our funding investments require funding from industry, no exceptions. This kind of engagement and commitment from industry is essential to ensuring that we're on the right track. Industry must have skin in the game, or we simply don't fund it. Lastly, OCE does not claim or manage IP rights. IP arising from projects is managed by the project participants. So I'd like to take a few minutes now to share 5 lessons learned. This will likely qualify as conventional wisdom for most of you here, but I hope there are a few others who may benefit from our experience of being on the front lines of commercialization for so many years. Number 1, recognize the importance of home market procurement. Companies with innovative products that have been tested and refined in their own province or country will have a lot more cachet for global markets. Our governments are beginning to recognize the important role that they can play in this regard as early adopters of new technology. OCE is currently working out the details of a partnership with the Ontario government that will help companies build relationships with hospitals and public health organizations to accelerate the adoption of emerging technologies and process improvements in the public health care sector. And at this year's Discovery Conference, we engaged all levels of government in a procurement marketplace to highlight their role as potential customers for Ontario's innovative products and services. Number 2, don't estimate the importance of creative partnerships. OCE is now in partnership with the Quebec Consortium for Drug Discovery to create a joint funding program focused on biomedical research in Quebec and in Ontario. By aligning scientific and business resources and expertise between the provinces, we expect to see the development of many novel and potentially transformative enabling new technologies for biopharmaceutical research. This signals a new approach to R&D based on bringing collaborative research relationships between public and private partners. Number 3, understand the importance of getting industry feedback early on in the process. We still see here in Canada and internationally as well a tendency for academic researchers to carry on their work without the benefit of industry feedback. The result is that products are often found to be irrelevant or not what the patient or caregiver needs. One of the speakers on personalized health at our Discovery Conference this year noted a dismally low approval rate for new technologies that come before the Ontario Health Technology Advisory Committee. This speaks loudly to the need for researchers and industry to collaborate much earlier in the process. Number 4, invest in the pull. What do I mean by that? I mean help build demand for your innovation amongst prospective customers, whether they are end users or government buyers. In the case of the healthcare system, there is still a learning curve amongst healthcare administrators and some physicians about how new diagnostic tests can be used and how they can benefit patients. It's up to the genomics community to educate their customers about how to order tests and talk to patients about the results in a meaningful way. Number 5, find ways to support, encourage, and guide new entrepreneurs. I'm told that there is a flock of new direct-to-consumer ventures in genomics in response to people's interest in knowing what their future holds. This has no doubt generated a large need for commercialization knowledge, while also raising a host of ethical and legal concerns that require expert advice. Perhaps there is a way for Genome Canada to support these and other entrepreneurs. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the field of genomics faces a number of special challenges when it comes to commercialization. The time frame in life sciences, and particularly in human health, is longer than average. And this makes it even more difficult to raise venture funds in early stages. Also, awareness of the impact genomics can have on solving real-world problems continues to lag. It will remain difficult to move genomics projects from science to product until engineering and applied science group recognize the opportunities inherent in this area of research. So, before opening the floor to questions, I'd like to touch on some of the reasons that I believe Genome Canada has every reason to be very optimistic about the potential for commercialization or translation. Genomics represents a vast new frontier of possibilities. We've only begun to understand the immense possibilities for the application of genomics. For example, while we still tend to approach clean technology mainly from an engineering perspective, the genomics applications are now coming to the surface. With the exception of some specialized areas, industry is still largely unaware of the potential of the benefits of genomics. Genome Canada has a huge role to play in advancing this learning curve. Canada has a strong reputation in terms of uptake of new technology. Speaking at Discovery this year, the general manager of a company that does genetic and biochemical diagnostic testing for the global medical community and has worked in 90 countries around the world noted that Canada has a much greater willingness than other countries to order and use new technologies. This is clearly very good news. As governments begin to see the benefits to patients and the associated cost savings, the receptiveness to new technologies will only grow. Some current trends also bode well for genomics. Governments are under pressure to find new ways to deliver health care at a reduced cost. There will be a growing appetite for new, cost-effective diagnostics and new treatments informed by genomics research. At the same time, this demand is being fed by a growth of global demographic of patients and healthcare providers who, due in part to the internet, are exceptionally well informed about new advances. Your innovative and far-sighted Genomics in Society program has helped pave the way for commercialization or translation of genomics research. This program, where all genomics research is examined from an economics, environmental, ethical, legal, and social perspective, sets the stage for a more informed process of development and smooth adoption of technologies. It increases the likelihood that scientific discovery will lead to real-world benefits. The market for genomics technologies is ever expanding. We know that genetics has, up until now, tended to be an area of medicine for the world's wealthiest countries in North America and Europe. This will continue to change as the so-called BRIC countries see growing economic prosperity and begin to increase accessibility to advanced healthcare for their citizens. The market for genomics technologies is ever expanding. And another big driver and opportunity is sequencing technology. It opens up the possibilities across all the life science sectors, and Canada must decide what role it wants to play in this important area. Finally, I would just like to underline the point that there is no one secret formula or model for the commercialization of research. At OCE, we continue to attempt to streamline the funding application process, better facilitate knowledge transfer from academics to industry, overcome the startup risks that deter private investors, and more effectively tap markets here and abroad. But there's no escaping that our complex innovation system often involves a painstaking and hard-fought journey from lab to market. At the same time, I would suggest that a few things can compare to the excitement and reward of being part of a breakthrough tool, product or service that is able to preserve the environment, better diagnose or treat a disease, save us valuable time, or in some other way improve the quality of life in our own country. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Tom, in your program, the first one you described it as, you said, like our Genome Canada's GAP program. Do your funds just flow to the academic, and it's an active academic industry partnership? How does that because we're always looking at ways to innovate our programs.
Yeah, and the $250,000 program?
Yes,
is that the one?
yes.
Yeah, no, that money actually goes to the company
It goes to the company.
to help it move forward. But the criteria is the company's got to be a academic spin-off, for lack of a better word, or a company, a startup that's been formed to commercialize IP coming out of the academic institutions. So look at it as really early stage seed capital to de-risk opportunities that hopefully can later get angel and venture capital. The common element in all these companies, though, is we would have had to fund the research. So what it does is for future investors is they say, look, OCE's been involved in this startup in effect for a couple of years. We funded the research with the academics. The entrepreneur who's going to run the company has been there from day one, and so we have a pretty good knowledge about it. So we find that companies that we have funded in that way, from the research through providing the seed funding, have a lot higher rate of success in attracting capital because people take some comfort that we've been in. And now here we are putting another $250,000 into the company. So it just it de-risks the opportunity for investors.
And when we were talking, you've also mentioned that you have a nice working relationship with the IRAP program.
Well, you know, partnerships are huge these days, and we've been fortunate in that the IRAP folks and OCE have worked together since there was an IRAP program. The NSERC Ontario offices for some of the programs actually is in our office, in our Mississauga office. So we designed a new voucher program that's new to us. We just announced it in June. So in one application, the company and the institution can apply for our money, NSERC money, IRAP money, and Connect Canada money, which is an internship fellowship program, with a single application and a guaranteed 30-day turnaround. And industry tell us this is wonderful because they get sick of getting bounced from institution to institution and program to program. So we did this, and we had set aside for a pilot around $20 million, and it was literally allocated within 60 days. So it's a big need for it.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great initiative to do that.
This morning, I don't know if you were here for the morning, but I had mentioned the sort of differences between the different sectors in tech transfer and the way you need to approach it. I was wondering if you have sort of an idea of the types of companies or the types of sectors that are uptaking your programs maybe more than others. Does it tend to be more, say, on the health side, or more on the the computing side, or is it, in my case, I'm interested, is it the agricultural background, or have you seen any trends that way?
Yeah, we do. First of all, we're not limited in terms of what areas we invest in, as long as it's consistent with the Ontario focus. We don't do real estate and we don't do mining and so on. So we invest in technologies. But pretty much year to year, 90% of our funding ends up in one of these four areas: advanced health, advanced manufacturing, ICT and digital media, and energy and environment. So that's where our funding goes. And this year we'll probably deploy about $60 million or $70 million of provincial and federal funding, and that'll be matched dollar for dollar by industry. Again, I can't overstate the fact that if industry won't invest in research with us and make the case about what it's going to do for them in terms of creating jobs, then we don't invest. We don't invest in research for the sake of research. NSERC and other organizations do a great job of that. That's not our mandate. The only thing we get measured on are economic outcomes, not how much research we may or may not have funded.
Thank you. I enjoyed your talk very much.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could comment. I hear your point about co-investing with industry and wanting to see that they're serious. But I wonder if you could comment on the U.S. SBIR program and its various stages, and whether you see a role federally for a program such as that in Canada, and in the fact they do have a competitive process, but they don't require a co-investment from industry.
Yeah, I think the SBIR program is great, and in fact, Alberta is about to run a prototype of it. We're looking at doing the same. Is everybody familiar with the program? Basically what it does is you identify, or the government identifies a problem through one of their agencies that they want solved that may have commercialization opportunities attached to it. They provide a small amount of money to a small company to do a proof of principle, and then if it works, you can get a larger amount of money. So it's really there to meet the needs of the government, but at the same time help create a company and a product that will have commercialization potential. So I think that's neat. But I think, in fact, in that case, one could easily argue that the government, the company, I would say, is putting in matching funding. They're not going to get 100% of it. So there is matching funding coming in through the company, either in kind or in cash. But it's a great program. It's been around for many years, and when I was in the States, I took much advantage of it.
In your lessons learned, one of the first one was home market procurement, and you mentioned that you were working with the decision makers in the healthcare system to try and, I guess, increase their excitement about innovative approaches in a notoriously kind of innovation-resistant system. We'd like to say a little bit more about how you're doing that. What arguments are you advancing? How are you trying to
I could talk about it forever, but I must tell you, first of all, the program's not announced yet, but I'll give you a little hint about what's coming down the pike if it comes down the way it's supposed to. So this is a provincial program, and often we hear, especially when we make investments in the life sciences sector, that people can't get any take-up in Canada, and Ontario in particular, because we've got such a conservative embedded system, especially in the hospitals. And the hospitals will say, we don't have the money to do it, and the companies will say, we can't do it for free, so never the twain shall meet, and off to the US they go. So what this program is going to do, on a pilot basis, is fund both the company's cost in putting that, whatever it may be, let's say it's software, into the hospital, and it's going to cover the hospital's costs in actually adopting that technology and seeing if it makes sense for them to run it. So this hasn't got to do with clinical trials, just to be clear. This is just to facilitate getting that first Ontario company that they would normally not get by covering the costs for both ends, for both the company and for the hospital in installing it and seeing if it meets its goals. So that's what the program's supposed to do. And one would argue, well, why not do it across the board? The medical one is such a bad one in terms of take-up, and where most of the complaints come from. It's less of a concern in the IT sector and energy. So that's the one that's going to be the focus of the first pilot, and I would suggest it will probably be announced in the next 60 to 90 days.
In the context of university research, there's about, in any given year, it's about 20% of all faculty that generate about 80% of a university's research budget. And then when you look year to year, it actually turns out to be the same 20%. And it's an interesting thing, too, when we've actually done innovators surveys at Canadian universities, we've also found out that it's actually, there's strong serial entrepreneurship of a very small number of people doing this as repeat behavior, starting new companies. So I was wondering about, within your programs, how many new people are you seeing every year, or are you getting a pretty solid cohort of people that are coming back and reapplying and obviously this is where we come back to the absorptive capacity business. Are they reapplying the learning into new contexts that they've had from previous rounds? And I'd just like a little bit of your reflection on how you deal with the incumbents versus the people who are the first timers, and whether or not you do different things for them within your programs.
Oh, yes, we do. So we see about 1,200 deals a year that we have to look at, either very short and distinct conversations. We get a student or we get a prof coming to us, And keep in mind, we've got 30 business development people. That's the people that make it happen around the province. Without those people, we'd be dead. We'd just be out of business. So they come to the business development people who are typically located at universities around the province, and they will say, I got this great idea. Here's what I want to do. And we'll say, it doesn't make any sense because there's no market. You got all kinds of patent problems. Nobody's going to buy it, blah, 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 blah. And we set it aside and we go to the next stage. And out of those 1,200, about 200 will get funded. So when we are driven by industry needs, not by what some researcher may be doing. So when a company comes to us and says, look, I have a need, and it could be a one-person startup, or it could be IBM, GE, and Siemens. They can all make the case to us that if you co-fund research, we're going to create jobs in Ontario, and it doesn't matter if you're a huge company or a one-person startup. So we look for the best person to meet their needs. So if somebody comes in and says, from Ottawa, and says, I want to do a startup, and I need some encryption software developed, because we're all over the province, we can see, gee, the best person to do this, because we've had experience with them before, is some prof or some students at, pick a Waterloo, for example. So away they go, and we connect the dots and make it happen. So we're less concerned about whether we've worked with that researcher, be it a prof and his students before, or her students, than we are with what the successful outcome will be. But I can tell you that, you know, the human nature of a business development person is if they brought a deal to some prof 3 times, and 3 times they screwed it up, haven't delivered, chances of getting the 4th one is pretty slim. Although we would never say that, because we have to view everybody's, you know, on their own merits. But just human nature is you don't want to disappoint the company by bringing them to a researcher who's not going to perform. So that just, you know, that just becomes part of the process. So I would say that probably, first of all, I'd say mostly it's the students doing the work, not the profs. So we do see tons of repeat profs managing projects, but it's usually the students, and they're the ones we want to get to, because that's where the future is. So typically it's new students coming in and out of programs all the time. So if you looked at the people that we're funding through these projects, between the profs and the students at a university, probably 90% would be new every time, every year, a high percentage, because of the fluctuation with the students coming and going. Any more questions? That was easy. Oh, sorry. I thought I could sneak out the door.
I just have one, and the point was raised in the panel session earlier that we don't have industry people here per se. As someone representing the research community who spent a lot of time doing outreach to industry trade associations and others, they have a lot of problems they'd like to solve, and they will sometimes very candidly remark to me, we've been spoiled here in Canada. We don't feel like we should have to invest. So now we're moving into a culture where we want co-investment from industry, but how do we catalyze them to move?
How do we catalyze them to move?
Yeah.
What we do is go out with our business development people and say, what problems can we solve for you that you don't have the resources in-house to do, and that you'd be willing to have a university or a college do for you? And if we can come up with a viable business solution, it's about business. This isn't about, gee, I'd love to give some money back to my favorite college. And I'm willing to get it funded half by OCE, the taxpayer, and I'll pay for half of it. That's how you get it done. But you know, if you can't engage them on a real world problem that they're willing to invest in, then, you know, we don't do it. And the only true measure we have is the 2 things we look at. One, are they going to match us dollar for dollar, at least? And secondly, they got to make a business case to us, them and the researchers, once they come together, that here's what the research is about, here's what the economic outcomes are going to be, here's the jobs we're going to create, the exports we're going to create, the taxes we're going to pay back to the province. And so we'll view it in that realm. But the applications that come in, we'll approve maybe 1 in 3, because, you know, the external reviewers, some prof will say, you know, this is really neat stuff, but it won't work, or it's a perpetual motion machine, and the industry guy may say, even if it does work, nobody's going to buy it anyway, so don't waste your money. So we have a really good balance. So I know it's a long answer to a very short question, but if it's not of interest to the of enough interest to the companies to make that investment and make the case that they should, you know, be accessing taxpayer money, then we just don't do it. But we have no shortage of demand. We got huge demand. And very valid demand, and if we had twice as much money, we'd probably fund twice as many deals, but that's just life in the big city. You know?
No, and that's good to hear. One of my experiences is I get a lot of feedback from industries. You know, I mean, we heard Jeff Monroe earlier talk about social license to operate, and these you know, these industry trade organizations recognize they need to do more to raise the profile of their industry.
Yeah.
But you will quite often get this phenomenon where no one wants to be the first adopter.
Well-
So you get, you know, I get a problem, it needs a solution, we've probably got off-the-shelf generic technology that can help, but just catalyzing someone to open up the purse strings and be that early adopter is a real challenge. And what we often get, coming back to the policy side of things, is this position of, well, you know, we're getting away with this now. Until government actually changes the regulations and makes us do a better job, we're not going to do it voluntarily. Even though we do hear these buzzwords about social license to operate, you know, I'm not seeing industry being too keen to jump on that bandwagon, even though technology is there to help them operate in much greener, cleaner, and more efficient ways.
We see some of that. We don't see a lot. People are typically wanting to use the OC programs for financial benefits. Sometimes, but not very often, it's driven by a new government mandate that may say you have to do this or you have to reach this level or whatever it may be. But usually it's just for better products that they can sell and create more jobs with, which is fine. But when it comes to the issue of the trade associations and the sectors, 2 weeks ago, we and NSERC jointly announced a program where we're going to fund platform technologies for the aerospace sector. So we had 130 people show up at a hotel in Toronto, 70 from industry, 60 from academia and government, and we had them there for a day. And so industry were very vocal about what they needed. But our mandate was funding the association in these particular projects was that it had to be applicable to the vast majority of the members, and it had to be platform technologies that they could all use, and it wasn't meant for one or two companies. It had to be accessible to everybody. In other words, it had to raise the tide for all of the industry members should they choose to adopt it. So it was good for a sector, not just for Pratt & Whitney or Bombardier.
I think that's terrific. Do you guys envision expanding beyond the aerospace sector to
Yeah, well,
perhaps
the
genomics?
second one we're doing is with the life sciences sector in Quebec. And the third one we're doing is with the Canadian Manufacturers and Export Association in the manufacturing sector.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions? Got everybody thoroughly confused about what we do? Sound like a mean capitalist up here telling you why we do it? Okay, thanks again, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it.
Do we need coffee and a little more sweet stuff, or do we try and come to some generalizable wisdom for the authors and this brief? If you were to read the follow-up to what was presented this morning, what would you all want to be reading? What convincing language do you need to read and bring to policymakers, other stakeholders to facilitate innovation? Collective wisdom from the crowd. Then the authors don't have to write anything more. Can I ask if the commentators have additional thoughts that in their 10 minutes they didn't quite expand on and would perhaps expand on?
If I could have the final slide from my talk, I'd expand on it a little bit, and in the context of the discussion we had today. It's Maine, M-A-I-N-E. Yeah, no, I think we've had, wide-ranging and really good discussion today, and I guess, as I said, thank you. As I said about the actual brief, the areas I'd like to see dug in a little bit more deeply is taking advantage of some of the other literature in entrepreneurship and innovation, and looking at through the case studies more deeply at absorptive capacity, relationships, and dynamic capabilities. And part of the way to look at them is through, in the case studies, elaborating more about the entrepreneurial choices and the business model choices that the companies are making. So in terms of policy recommendations that I brought up earlier and ran out of time to talk about, you know, I think there seemed to be broad support, although I'm sure not exclusive support, to say that, you know, particularly biotech and genomics sector could use more direct R&D support, you know, as recommended from the Jenkins report. So it doesn't mean abandoning by any means indirect R&D support, but maybe changing that ratio a little bit. Right now, out of all the countries, the OECD countries that or the countries surveyed, it's beyond just OECD. In the reports that we've done with the Industry, Science, Technology, Innovation Council, Canada is 23rd out of 25 countries studied in terms of its level of direct support of R&D. And it's number one in indirect. So, you know, that ratio, particularly in this sector, it doesn't seem particularly helpful. We talked, and certainly our lunchtime speaker talked in terms of OCE about their ideas on government procurement. I think that's you know, very helpful. So maybe thinking about some of those policy recommendations. The other one that I just wanted to talk about is some programs and models. We talked about SBIR. MyTax has been a very good one. The voucher programs that Tom just talked about, and also similar ones in Alberta that have been going for a few years. And BC tried one just this past year, but BC's was much smaller. They just tried, you know, it's $7,500. It's, you know, a very small amount to match industry to something and they leveraged off MyTax infrastructure. So, you know, thinking about those and other sources of direct funding. And then one other thing that I didn't talk about that I wanted to bring up is explicitly looking at models where scientist entrepreneurs have you know, have faced these challenges, maybe not in the Canadian context, or maybe in the Canadian context, and have come up with, again, this is part of the dynamic capabilities idea, but have come up with strategies to try to overcome some of the obstacles. And explicitly, Bob Langer has a couple of papers now in Nature Biotech that he's talked about his patenting strategy, and he's talked about his 3P ideas, his 3P advice on how to try to make companies and VC funders more interested in your technology that's coming out of the university. So again, this is not looking at the receptor capacity, this is looking at how do you make yourself more interesting to industry to get over some of these challenges. And he talks about having a blocking patent, about having a very broad platform technology, and having a paper in a very prestigious journal, and the combination of these and the timings of them in order to you know, get to lower some of the uncertainty that's perceived by investors and by the large companies that are you know, potential alliance partners. And so I think looking at some of those strategies and learning from them could be useful. You know, these are just some ideas for policy recommendations, and you know, I talked earlier about educating biotechnology and genomic scientists, but I do think that the brief could dig a little bit deeper into in the case studies into ideas on of more examples of what they mean by receptor capacity. Thanks.
So I'm Jeff Kinder. I work at NRCan. Jeff Monroe is my boss. So some of these comments will sort of echo, I think, where he was going as well. But first I would say, you know, as somebody who works in policy every day, we usually deal with 2-page briefs, not 24 pages. So you know, just the idea of you know, I like the idea of putting the case studies in an appendix, because the case studies are very rich and they should be there. But the packaging, unfortunately, can be as important as the message. And so I would encourage you to think strongly about the format. There needs to be some sort of executive summary or something that's a bit tighter that gets the points across more quickly. So while I agree with the ideas of going deeper in some areas, I think you also need to think about how you present the policy recommendations. The second point I would raise again is the front end I find very heavily influenced by the idea of university-industry interactions. And so just again, the idea that government labs also play a key role. In fact, in I think it was the Ag Biotech case study, it comes out very clearly the role of the NRC and Ag Canada labs in Saskatoon. And so bringing the government lab as a performer of S&T as well as a funder of S&T into the discussion, I think is important. And as well, I guess if we're going to add the third leg, we should add the fourth leg as well. So the fourth pillar organizations as well. And then the last thing I thought was really interesting was the TRLs. We're playing around with that a little bit at NRCan as well, and I think that's exciting. But I didn't actually then see in the case studies an actual discussion of the TRLs. So it was really, David, with your slide where you sort of brought in, okay, what TRL level are we at with each of these case studies? So just bringing that discussion in a little bit more, I think would be interesting. So.
I've had 10 minutes, so I'll only take a couple now. I'd like to remind the people who are writing the brief that there is a receptor capacity at the level of the public that also needs to be thought about. I think it's really important, whether it be in Natural Resources for Canada, as Jeff Monroe said, or whether it be in health sciences. It's hugely important to understand that if you don't have public acceptance, then you're not going to have, ultimately, a market. There's going to be the kind of disaster that, for example, Monsanto faced a few years ago. And it's possible to have an eye out for that from the very beginning, right back in the lab, if you actually work with those people who know a great deal about the sophisticated social society in which we live, and that's social scientists and humanists.
First, thanks for the invitation to attend this event. I found it quite interesting. My question, or at least my recommendation to the authors, has to do with the concept of absorptive capacity, or more generally, receptor capacity. Jonathan Linton and I are editors of journals, innovation journals, and between us, we probably reviewed over 1,000 papers that cite absorptive capacity in the last couple of years. It's one of the most commonly used things. And I would estimate that we've rejected over 90% of those submissions. And the key problem, I think, with much of the papers and more generally the concept is it's a post hoc issue. And the problem is that, you can make the argument that this company had a high absorptive capacity because it was successful. So it doesn't actually help future companies in actually developing it. And as a major policy implication, it's how do you measure it? How do you determine before it succeeds or fails, whether or not it is really determining whether or not it's a useful concept. And I think that's a key challenge that really needs to be incorporated into this paper. And if you can do that, I'm sure one of us would be happy to publish it, because it's a big challenge trying to figure that out. Thank you.
There is enough, right? we can cut this conversation at some point where, you've heard lots of ideas. Some might be a little bit out of scope. Some can possibly replace some things in the brief, and there'll be some tough choices. I would have liked, Jeff, for you to expand a little bit on what what makes, in such brief documents, what needs to be, how do you persuade in a very short document? Or has all the work of persuasion been done by the time the short document goes up somewhere?
Well, and of course,
Which is to say,
if I had all the answers to this, then I'd be a much better policy
on
analyst.
policy internally, how those ideas get generated, and how at some point there is a policy being developed or an issue that's been. So tell us a little bit more from the inside, because I think that would help a group of us quite a bit.
Well, I mean, it's a bit crazy to talk in terms of a 2-page memo, and yet that really is the reality of our world. We deal with 2-page memos that have a lot of white space on them, which means you got to get to your point really quickly. And it's not because the people who are reading it, aren't interested in the academic literature or, the ideas and the theories. But, I mean, my deputy is one of the smartest men I've ever met, and yet he just doesn't have the time to read all that. And he reads a lot. So I mean, I think the key is have all this stuff that you have, which is good stuff. But then what's the 2-pager that goes on top of that? Because when something like this comes into our department, our deputy will get that. He'll read the 2-pager, and then he'll say, Jeff, you read this 26-pager and let me know what you think. So you got to get to that point, the recommendations right up front, and then use that as a tease to then, want to follow up with what the more detailed stuff is. But like I said, there's no magic solution here, and I certainly haven't figured it all out. But you also raise a good point that it's not just the policy brief. The policy brief is actually almost an afterthought. A lot of the work has to be done up front in building the relationship. So, like once you have a final product, and then you release it or put it on your website or whatever, that's just the beginning, really. You need to then, do events like this and use other means to really get the discussion going. There are others here from government as well, so maybe they can add their thoughts.
Because it'd be interesting to hear a bit about differences in cultures within departments or within. Oh, please.
My name is Frank Main. I was Member of Parliament from 1974 to 79. We saw the founding of SHRC and NSERC and what was then Medical Research Council. I was on the Science Council of Canada in the 80s, and I've been following science policy along these lines. And I made the recommendation to the federal government back in the 80s about the SBIR program in quite detail. It was rejected, and I never found out why. So this feedback or lack of feedback from the policymakers is very frustrating. I'm not the only one that's made that recommendation. Since then, there have been several people who have recommended it. I'm glad to hear today that Ontario and Alberta are considering doing some of that. That's fantastic news. I followed the SBIR program over the years, and it's 2% of all government departments have to spend science on small business. That's huge. And so it's a 3-stage process where the first stage and the first 2 stages are government funded and the last stage is private sector funded. It gets you going. Just the credibility of having SBIR support itself is just a phenomenal shot in the arm. And so I would highly recommend that policy be looked at and recommended in your policy recommendations.
This is the brief that will succeed on that. Yes, please, Mark.
On a slightly different tack, a number of people this morning talked about regulation, and I just want to underline that again. A lot of the sort of policy options and instruments that we talk about cost a ton of money, or will cost a ton of money. SBIR grants will cost a ton of money. But regulation is one of those things that needn't cost a ton of money and can be extraordinarily catalytic. Again, particularly in the health technologies area, health biotech area. If we can have what everybody wants in a regulatory system, it's tough and it's rigorous, and it's fair, but it's also nimble and it's flexible and it's intelligent. But if we can get all those wonderful things together, and in a small country like Canada, it's a lot easier to do, or should be a lot easier to do, than say in the United States with the FDA, or in Europe with its its extraordinarily bureaucratic processes. If we can get that, it really provides a terrific advantage for companies located in Canada in the health biotech area. And that's particularly true in areas of emerging technologies. I'm thinking particularly of regenerative medicine at the moment. One of the major reasons why venture capital is so reluctant to invest in regenerative medicine technologies is uncertainty about the regulatory environment. The fact that they're going to get held up, they're going to get contradictory rulings and unfair rulings and inconsistent rulings. And to its credit, Health Canada has been very, very responsive and constructive in the way that it's engaged the regenerative medicine community in Canada. And I'd like to encourage that to continue. But it doesn't cost a ton of money, and it can provide a real advantage to Canadian companies.
Maybe just pick back up on some of the comments about culture issues, about making sure that this concept of commercialization, valorization, is endorsed and adopted as being meaningful. That we link it to key issues that we want to get movement on. But then there's that whole question of what are the processes that go along with that? What are the circle of policies that relate to that to facilitate coming together and working on the knowledge translation, the knowledge brokering? What are the IP policies? What are the policies in terms of facilitating interaction with the private sector or the receptors? And what are the suite of things that need to take place to facilitate these kinds of actions? And what we've heard from OCE is, we need a bit of more of a broad-based approach, looking at these things, and it can't be a small isolated domain. It's got to be, what are the interconnectedness between some domains that allow us to get the movement that we want?
It's Andy Atkinson, Health Canada. I find this conversation very interesting, and I'm just going to toss out a few challenge questions in terms of the brief, because we do want the message to be fairly simple as we move forward. So I guess the question is, as this document concludes, are we just identifying hurdles related to receptor capacity, or are we trying to recommend how we're going to overcome these hurdles, or are we going to try to identify a process to develop recommendations to overcome these hurdles? So what's the, how are we concluding the document, I guess is my question.
My answer? The author's answers. Well, you've now put me in this awkward position because Genome Canada does not really set what the briefs are supposed to cover. I think, as hard as work is to identify hurdles, good people can get to that point. We've all been getting to that point a lot. So you're right that it is more about if there aren't single solutions, and we've heard here that because of this cross-sectoral, there needs to be more specificity. It's not a one solution for all. So it's not I don't think, a short menu or suite of solutions, right? So then I think you're right. It is about processes, and we've heard about things that are very much about the dynamics, the relationships, whether there are strategies in place that from which flow the directions for the common goals, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're stuck with, keeping it at a generic level so that there isn't a lot of detail so that it can fit shortly, or where do we fit the details? Let me say this. I have tried to bring the series of GPS events and policy briefs that go along with them to be somewhat parallel in some of Genome Canada's strategic thinking and strategic initiatives and activities. So I'm, as much as I'd love something to be all in here, it's not that simple. So it's all in here. When next will Genome Canada be meeting with Health Canada, and what that conversation will be? Will it be informed by the state, irrespective of whether you found in the finalized brief the policy option that resonates. So it is process. And the process is not just the document. It is very much these relationships. So in a way, Andy, I think I'm thanking you because you've just given me the perfect segue to conclude, unless there are other... Yeah. Well, now, so, okay. Now that I've put myself out on a limb, others will. Thank you.
No, I thought I'd just put you on the spot to ask you a question about how you thought it should end. I mean, I have my own views, but I wanted to hear the received wisdom on this from Genome Canada, just to see like this question of continuity with the other documents and other things that are going on. Well, there are actually two things that I thought, well, certainly one thing that I certainly thought would have actually come up more here today, and I didn't really put it in the document, was actually about the skills agenda. And that was one thing that I thought we would have talked more about in this context, because I take the point, you know, that you made earlier about absorptive capacity actually being problematic because it's kind of post hoc. It appears to describe rather than to be predictive. And so one of the things that I would have said about this is that we actually don't know yet enough about the nature of the learning activities that go on in firms that actually then make them be the post hoc cases. And so one of the things that I've been quite interested in is trying to think about how we actually structure a skills agenda that helps us to, you know, develop at least the right kinds of attitudes that lend themselves to the dynamics that we describe as you know, absorptive capacity or dynamic capacity and all of that sort of stuff. So some of the work that I've been doing in the UK has actually been about the skills agenda and implementing it in ways that involve university industry partnerships around bioeconomy. And I think that that's really important, and I think that some of what we're doing in the kind of graduate education that we're doing around bioeconomy is actually to test out some of these theories in practice by getting master's students to engage in particular ways with partners external to universities as a way of actually building up knowledge about not the post hoc thing, but to actually get inside views about what it is that has actually made learning go on in a particular way, and why some things appear to have worked in some cases and not in other cases. But really, that's actually in a way to develop a kind of general plea, which is where, personally for me, I thought the policy brief just kind of, you know, stopped, and I really appreciated the point about, you know, how does this end? Because for me personally, I thought that where the policy brief really needs to go to is to actually try to move us out of that post hoc description of what absorptive capacity looks like and into a more systematic study of Canadian life science innovation, where it's working to try to get something that starts to look a little bit more like a predictive science around this, to really try to figure out. But I think that actually might involve working, you know, with OCE and other partners around to actually get in there and get embedded with some of this activity while it's ongoing, to tell the success stories as well as the car crashes, because you can oftentimes learn a lot more from the car crashes than you can from the success stories. And I think that that's actually something that really, perhaps as an overarching recommendation, I would think that we would need, because one of the things that I think that kind of work, almost ethnographic but more systematic, I think, frankly, that kind of work will actually get at some of the big problems around the cultural and language mismatches that exist all the way through these kinds of university academic, state-mediated kinds of activities. And I don't think that we're really getting the nuanced picture at this point in time in the Canadian life sciences context. And so that would actually be what I think should be a strong recommendation from this. And you might say, oh boy, yeah, well, that's typical because, you know, university researchers are arguing for more research. But I think that this is research of a very particular kind in terms of really analyzing, like we've done in the past before with, you know, IRAP, for example, and OCRE here in town, what it is actually driving good deal making and exchange of value and all that sort of stuff. And I don't think we're getting that picture just yet. So that's, for me, that's how it would end.
I support that, because either you have definitive recommendations on how to overcome hurdles, or you have a bit of a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be nice to have a plan.
Well, I think we have come to the closing, the natural closing of the event. I am thankful for all of you for being here. I am counting on you to bring this out into your institutions, to your colleagues. The work will go on. The final brief will take a few months, a few more months than just a few months before it's completed. But don't forget, it will eventually appear as a final brief. And the next time that a GPS event will take place will be at the Canadian Science Policy Conference in Toronto in November. I hope that some of you or some of your institutions will be represented there. From a science policy perspective, I think that is another important forum. And if you wish to take a few minutes, we're ahead of schedule, to look at the very back of your folder, there is an evaluation form. Don't be limited by the questions we've asked. Give us your feedback. We very much appreciate it. It helps tremendously. And to the next time that we may be in Ottawa, I hope in the meantime that all goes well in all of your endeavors. And we hope that you'll be future participants in other GPS events. I have a great debt to some of my colleagues who helped me try to pull this off. Hélène Meyer has most likely left, but she was at the front desk. Mallory Dunlop was at the back of the room, and others at the office. And many of my colleagues are here, and all of their thoughts are what inspires me and help me put this together. So thank you to all of them in the room. And enjoy the rest of a sunny afternoon. Believe it or not, it is a nice sunny day outside.